This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, interviews and conversations. Welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Mark, and today I have a guest that I'm very pleased to be talking to. He's local, and we're going to talk about Lambertville, New Jersey, which is where my murder mysteries are all set now because I moved nearby. I'm 15 minutes away in Kingwood, but my characters all mysteriously moved to Lambertville in the area, so I've been really looking forward to talking to this gentleman. It's Lou Toboz. He's a native New Jerseyan. I'm just going to read through some basic points from your bio. You were raised in Trenton. You went to Rutgers for your BA and returned a few years later to get a master's in social work. You worked in psychiatric hospital institutions, school systems, and clinics, retiring from that field after 35 years of social work. You're currently a full-time realtor. I also know you that way, too, because I had a book reading at the realty office. And you've lived in Lambertville for about 40 years. Now, our conversation today, you are a past vice president of the Lambertville Historical Society, and you continue on the board of trustees. You are the city's historian on the Historic Preservation Commission, and you're part of a group of local residents who've maintained and restored the park on York Street for the last 30 years. You and a friend some years ago published a book called Lambertville, and you wanted to say during the pandemic you are able to social distance but still interact with people on the street as you walk your dog. I'm sure you're a familiar sight in the neighborhood. And here we go, Lou. How are you?
I'm doing fine today. It's a nice day in January. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to getting out on one of my 3 days off. And I don't know if we're going to go to Lambertville today, but my husband and I frequently go over there and walk. I love walking around town, and I love having used it's a city. I call it a town, but it's really a city. But it's small enough.
Yes.
It's small enough that I think of it as a town, and when I'm writing about it, I often refer to it as a town. How did you end up in Lambertville?
One of the positions I had was working in a group home. It was right in the middle of the Sauerland Mountains on 300 acres. And I grew up in Trenton, as you said, and I always wanted to live in the country. So I found this great apartment a short distance away. And after about 8 months, I said, I'm not a country boy. I didn't like getting in the car to just get a newspaper. I never saw people. So somebody I knew was just buying a house in Lambertville. It had 4 bedrooms. Said, would you like to share a house? And I did. So I moved to Lambertville, and I've been here ever since.
Now, I would love to live in the city, but we do live in the woods. When you talk about living in the country, Frank and I, we're not very far from you, but we're in the woods. I have to drive Stockton is 6 miles away, so I cannot walk to town. That's probably the one thing that I am not fond of living out here, because I would love to be able to walk to the coffee shop, walk to different stores, and all of those things.
Yeah, it's an entirely different experience in town, and just meeting people and various people. And I guess over these years I've been here, just seeing the people that were here, people that are here, and then meeting the new people coming in. And it's a great town to just, if you're a social person, it's a great town, especially if you have a dog. People will know your dog's name, and then after about 6 months, they'll finally call you by name.
Now, how did you become involved as with the Historical Society and with the history of Lambertville?
I saw something in the paper about the annual house tour, and they were looking for docents to sit in a house, and I volunteered. It was a nice group of people, and I joined, and literally the rest was history. I just became involved with it, and then I liked talking, and I would talk to a lot of the people that were here, that were born in town, maybe second, third generation people. And I just like to get some of their stories and hear them talk. So I got some of their stories, and then with the Historical Society, I got some of the official story about Lambertville. And when you mentioned about city, yes, it's the only city in Hunterdon County. It's every place else is a township, or it could be a borough. But Lambertville is the only city, and it had something to do with some special legislation. We're not the biggest municipality. There's only 4,000 of us here in town.
Well, and I was reading that it was incorporated as a city in 1872, and from the mid 1800s to the early 1900s, the ferry, the canal, and the railroad, and the Old York Road stagecoach route all contributed to the development of the city. And that's part of the one thing I want to mention too, is that there was a railroad. Well, there is a railroad. It's the tracks. The train doesn't come here anymore, but the canal, are tracks along that. And I don't know when the train stopped coming here. Do you?
There's two different stops of the train. The train was used as part of the Belvedere Railroad, and that was one of the things that helped develop town. If you want later, we can talk about the development of town. But what happened was a major part of that railroad was in Lambertville. There was a roundhouse where they would repair all the locomotives and the cars and that sort of thing, and that then developed, with the city, and that came in just after the canal. So like mid 1800s is when these two things came to town and really affected town. Railroads stopped being a way of transporting goods. When I was a kid, I remember stopping at Washington Crossing, which is not too far from here, and I counted 100 cars going down the same line that would go through Lambertville. And then that just was discontinued, and then another entity took over as more of a tourist train, local kind of a thing, called the Black River and Western. And that was used up until, I'm going to say, about 15, 20 years ago. I'm not quite sure. And now they're talking about restarting the service in about another year or two. They have been restoring the track. And that will go from Lambertville through Ringo's and then go to Flemington. And when that was in existence, I did go. People would have a birthday party. They would have a wedding. They would have a murder mystery. And it was great fun. You'd just travel for, I guess, about an hour and a half, get off in Flemington, you could walk around a little bit, get back on the train, and come back to Lambertville.
I can't wait for that. I'll definitely do that. In Lambertville Station, was that the train station?
Yes, it was. When I first came to town, that was abandoned. And then people who took it over, Dan Whitaker and his organization, they bought that property, and everything that's done there is incredible. They built the other buildings, so now there has the inn, and that was at one point, or it still might be, our largest employer in town.
Oh, the inn.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of like was the trigger for town. A little bit of the history of the town is when that railroad came in and the canal, other factories came up. So we had spoke works that made wagon wheels. We had hairpin factories. We had foundries for iron. We had different kind of organizations for ceramics. And at one point, jockey underwear was made in Lambertville.
Really?
Yeah. And some of the things that we were making, went out, the need for them stopped prior to the Great Depression. Hairpins, women started to bob their hair. They didn't need those long Victorian pins anymore.
Well, yeah.
Nobody had wagons, they had cars. So that closed down. So a lot of the businesses went, and the Renaissance kind of was with art, restaurants, and that's pretty much where you are today. And a lot of it's called adaptive reuse of buildings. So something that was a factory could become an office building, could become a house, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and for anybody who hears this and has never been to Lambertville, it's very artistic. It's kind of I think of it as a sister city to New Hope, Pennsylvania, because New Hope, it's across the bridge. There's a bridge in Lambertville. You can drive over it, but Frank and I often will park in Lambertville because there's no free parking in New Hope, and we'll just walk over the bridge to New Hope, Pennsylvania. And it's a very artistic feel to both places. I personally prefer Lambertville, but galleries and restaurants, and it has a real progressive feel to it. Hunterdon County is quite conservative, but Lambertville feels really progressive. I'll use that word. Now, I wanted to ask you about the Historical Society. And just background on that. It's been around a while.
Yeah, and also with that, there were several incarnations of that. I guess the huge development of it was related to a woman named, there's two pronunciations of her name, Narducci or Narducci. Her first name was Alice. She was instrumental in saving the headquarters of the Historical Society presently. It's called the James Marshall House. James Marshall was the man who actually was from Lambertville, was in California, and he was on Sutter's Mill, and he's the one who actually discovered the gold in California. And I guess in the 60s, the properties were being acquired for other reasons. Businesses were closed, so they wanted to make a larger parking lot for a church, and one of the buildings was the Marshall House. And Alice saved that building, and then that became a state park. I think it's officially the smallest state park in New Jersey, and it's the headquarters for the Historical Society. And it was active, became less active, became active again. And I would say probably when I went to that first house tour, which is probably in the early 80s, is when we restarted again. And that's when I became involved with the Historical Society.
And what are some of the things that the Historical Society offers? I know you do walking tours.
Yes, we do walking tours during the warm weather and when possible. And we've also done them virtually. I've done several virtually. We've had actually 100 to 120 people show up for these virtual walking tours. And we also have the house tour, and that's usually in the fall. And then we have the plein air art exhibit, where local artists will exhibit their work, and then we have auctions. What we do is money goes to preserve the Marshall House. We have to pay $1 a year rent to the state, but we're required to maintain that building. And that means air conditioning, heating, roof, everything else that needs to be done. We also offer scholarships, and we have meetings where people can learn about town, and we're involved in a lot of the activities of town.
Now, are there some favorite things about Lambertville that you, off the top of your head, that you especially like about the city and living there?
I like a lot about the social aspect of it. I'm a social person. That's why I left the country. And, talking with people, socializing, going to their houses, have gatherings. We do a lot of things in town like block parties and Shad Fest, and we have parties in our house with the Shad Fest. We organize with anything needs to be done for charities. We have food banks. I also enjoy the proximity of being in a setting like that, but also you could walk from our 1.1 square miles of Lambertville, and there are horses. 2 years ago, there were cows on a farm. So we're kind of like a little urban area, but then we're close to the country, like where you live. We can take a quick ride to the covered bridge. We can go through the beautiful areas of Surgeonsville and Rosemont and just see all that. So I kind of like that aspect of it, and also the proximity to New York. I could be in New York in an hour and 20 minutes. I could be in Philadelphia at the Italian Market in 45 minutes.
Yes.
So it's proximity to other things, yeah.
And also Music Mountain Theater, that's part of Lambertville.
Yes. Sinton Terrell started the very first type of that theater, and that was in Lambertville. It was a great thing. We also have the Riverside Symphonia, because as you said, it's a very artistic town. So a lot of people did things. They went to Juilliard, but then maybe after a couple of years they got married, got involved with other things, but they're great musicians. So we have a lot of people musically inclined, artistically inclined. And as you know, you can go to any type of restaurant in town, and they're all chef and owned. They're not any. We have no corporately owned businesses, national businesses that are restaurants.
Oh, I never thought about that. You're right. And no grocery stores. You got to really go to the Giant where I work.
Yeah,
to get your groceries.
Giant is great.
Now, I had one quick question. You said you've been giving virtual tours. How do you do a virtual tour?
The president of our historical society is a person with lots of energy. His name is Mike Mensch, and he somehow puts together all these various different components of different things, and one of them is the walking tour. So he went with me, and we went through what I do on tour. He then took photos and then put them all in his system. So when we do the walking tour, it can go for an hour to an hour and a half, and the slide will come up, map of the streets, and then people after that can, since it's on Zoom, they could then ask questions. And some of the people, we had people from the Azores show up on that, and somebody from Greece, besides people from California, Canada, and all parts of the United States.
That's great. I should actually do that. Now, how can what's the URL for the Historical Society website? And I never looked up to see if the city had its own website.
The city has its own website also for people to look up the different organizations in town, and then also to get involved with the different departments if there's questions about what they would need. But the Historical Society has a website, which also is does an incredible thing of explaining what we do, and that's where the information also was on the virtual walking tours. And then hopefully this summer we'll be back to the live tours. That's always a great thing to do.
Well, I hope so, and I know Frank really enjoyed it. Is the how do you experience this whole pandemic? Its effect on town, like what's
Yeah. Thank you for that question. What I noticed is, Lambertville is about 10% essential business district, and the rest is residential. And I live on the fringe of central business district, but I've noticed that there's lots of people are walking through town because they want to see the shops. They may stop for coffee or something like that. But even at the height of of the isolation, they had to just get out of the house. So people were coming, and personally, I would stay away from the central business district during that time because I didn't want to associate. But I think we see a lot of people, and I see a lot more people with dogs. And you could socialize across the street by saying, "Hey, Mark, how are you? What's new today?" And feel comfortable. But I guess it's like everywhere else. It's like I have to keep remembering today is Monday. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Fortunately, you have the routine of your job where you have to be there, and so you have that routine. I do real estate, so that's like 7 days a week anyway. So I do, showing houses, but there's also limits that. There's restrictions on showing houses and working with people.
Sure.
So it has affected everybody. And it's affected the restaurants especially because we have small restaurants, a lot of small restaurants, and if they open up inside, they only could have 3 tables. I mean, that's not very good for business, trying to have that food and get ready and whatever. Yeah.
Well, Lou, I want to thank you for talking to me today. I know it's been a long time that I wanted to do this. We finally managed to set it up. And I just want to let people know again, I love Lambertville. If you're in this area, it's just a place you have to see. And you can, like I said, you can walk across the bridge and there's a little place right in the middle of the bridge where the state line is, and it says Pennsylvania on one side and New Jersey on the other. So I always see these tourists stopping and taking a picture with one foot in each state.
Yeah.
But it's just a wonderful place. I love living in the area. The Delaware Valley is gorgeous, and like you said, it's 45 minutes from Philadelphia, an hour and a half from New York City. And it was nice to hear from you and hear more about the city and about the Historical Society. So I want to thank you again, Lou. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And also, I enjoy your books because I love when you start talking about it. I know that street. Okay, that's the shop. That's where I got the coffee. Okay. They're making the left-hand turn. So it's fun for people who live in town to make that connection also with your books.
Well, I need to stop by and drop off the new one. I don't think you have the new one. It's
no
reservation for that's really Lambertville. The Lambertville Inn is there because there's a writers' conference that takes place in the book. But I fictionalize the businesses because small businesses you really need to do that so you're not upsetting anybody.
Right.
Yeah, I'll drop those off when I have a chance, and
great.
Hope to see you at some point again too.
I hope so too, and it was great talking to you.
Yep. Have a great day, Lou. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the One Thing or Another podcast with host Mark McNeese. Interviews and conversations with interesting people doing interesting things.